Thank you. I did what I was supposed to do. I studied a little bit about FTD, devoted several hours to writing down a speech here, which I did, went over it, reviewed it, and then I got here. I got here a couple hours early, and I attended some of Dr. Grossman's breakout session, and I heard some of the questions raised, and then I eavesdropped on some discussions, which I love doing. And now I've got to completely rewrite this speech. So instead of FTD, I want to talk about my grandson. He's really adorable. And I'll tell you why I want to talk about my grandson. He's now 5. When he was about 10, 11 months old, he stopped babbling. And then it seemed like he stopped listening. And I told my daughter to get him to a pediatrician quick. And she did. And he said, "It's nothing. Speech comes later, especially with boys. Don't worry about it." And he talked her into not worrying about it, kind of. But she's still worried. And I said, get her to a developmental neurologist. And he said the same thing. And she felt this knot in her stomach that nobody was hearing her until we got to Hopkins and found out that he had autism. Now do you know why I wanted to talk about my grandson? A lot of heads are nodding here. It's about knowing the truth. It's about living with fear, even terror. And it's about not being heard and not being respected by the larger world. That's why I wanted to talk about my grandson. My job here today is to talk about caregivers, giving and taking care. I do a lot of public speaking, and I do a lot of getting lost driving to giving my speeches. So I drive myself, so I get careful directions, as you know, and I tape them up on my dashboard while I'm driving so I can read them. Well, I was giving a lecture way out in Bucks County, which to those of you who aren't local, you need a passport to get to. And it's at night, it's this time of year, and I'm driving there by myself, and one of my nurses, out of the goodness of her heart, decided to wax my dashboard that afternoon. And of course it fell on the floor, and you know which side was face down, you know. So I pulled into a gas station. Really isolated gas station, and this kid comes out who is a big kid of about 17 years old with tattoos all over his body, pierces, you just don't want to look where there's pierces. And he struts up to the van, and I explain what the problem is. And he sees what's happening in the van, that I'm by myself, and he says, wait a minute, and he goes into the office and he gets tape, and we spend about 5 minutes together while he's trying to figure out where he can put this where I can see. And I said, well, how about we'll tape it to the passenger seat? And he said, no, you won't be safe because you've got to turn your head too far to see them, and we figured it out directly. He cared. He cared about me. And as I pulled out of the gas station, I saw him standing there in my rearview mirror, and I cared about him. I wondered about his life and wished for him ease. Two humans caring about one another. That's fundamental to what it means to be human. When a child is born, every fiber in our body wants to care for them forever. That caring doesn't diminish and it doesn't go away. Our children need our care and they'll do anything to get it. And children give care. There's evidence in nursery schools, preschools, daycare, that children care, feel empathy for one another. When one child cries, another child has a tendency to cry. When one child's injured, the other child will become alert and care, evidence of care. It's human. We need care. When we don't get it, our physical or emotional lives are at stake. And it's our instinct to give care. We see it every day. Sometimes when I'm driving my van, I have difficulty doing it. If I'm not straight in the chair, I feel lopsided, or if it's a windy day and my van feels buffeted. And when that happens, I'll drive in the right lane, I'll drive slowly, and I'll put my flashers on. And people seem to care about me when they pass. Nobody blows their horn. Nobody shows me their manicure on their long finger. That's the frustrating thing about quadriplegia. I can't do it back. I hate that. But anyway, when my flashers are on, I'm telling the world, I'm vulnerable here. I'm doing the best I can. And people seem to care. They just go around me. It's our instinct. And we know that caring for others raises endorphins in the brain. Caring for others raises the body's natural antidepressants. Receiving care raises the body's endorphins. Observing someone give care raises endorphins. It's natural. It's human. It's how we survive as a species. Caring helps all of us, all around. And it doesn't matter what direction it goes in. It just doesn't matter. We all need love. It doesn't matter which direction it goes in. If you need love, give it. You'll feel better. So, why is there something called compassion fatigue, caretaker burnout? I trust most people in this room feel it or have felt it. If this is such a natural phenomenon, why do we burn out? What causes it? What causes it is a combination of things. When demands outstrip your ability to perform. Sound familiar? Chronic helplessness. And denial of one's emotional needs. Sound familiar? Inevitably, these lead to burnout and even depression. Caretaking is unidirectional. One gives care and one receives it. But caring goes both ways. When I was in a position where my family, my loved ones, my friends, had to care for me, caring was not unidirectional. I cared for them as much as they cared for me. They did the physical labor, but my caring took the form of affection. It took the form of gratitude. Sometimes it took the form of guilt, which wasn't pretty. I became depressed or angry or frustrated. But these were all manifestations of mutual care. When it's pure, the labor part's secondary. When one's caring for the other, when both care for each other, the labor part of the work is really secondary. Not so with FTD. With FTD, it's often unidirectional. One loses parts of a loved one who's not able to understand their own experience, let alone the experience of others. Either one loses their deepest feelings, their compassion, their understanding, their empathy, or they lose their ability to communicate it. Either way, there's a part of the interpersonal barrier, interpersonal link that's severed, and maybe severed forever. And in that case, caring now becomes a lonely, lonely piece of business. And the mourning begins immediately. When the flicker in a loved one's eyes begin to go with each missed word, with each awkward behavior, a small part of your history dies, a small part of your future dies. So, how do you cope? How do you cope with this? Betty Rollins was a newspaper reporter many, many years ago. And she was the first to write these illness narratives that so many of us write. It was about her breast cancer. The title of her book, if any of you remember, First You Cry. That's what you do. First you cry. Not just for the loss of your loved one, not just for the loss of your dream, but in a way for the loss of yourself, your own identity. You know what your community says to you, your friends, your loved ones. How is he? How is she? What can I do to help you with him or her? You become secondary to them in the mind of your community and in your own. Caretaker burnout is about suppressed emotions. You must feel what you feel. Buried feelings are buried alive, and they stay, and they find a voice somehow, somewhere. Buried alive. You must allow yourself to feel the nightmare, feel the grief, feel the guilt when you leave to take care of yourself. Feel it. Feel the guilt about the rage and feel the rage. Feel the righteous indignation, the shame about their behavior, and the terrible frustration about not being able to communicate that someone who may be your best friend. Feel these feelings fully, despite the pain, because this is your life now. And this issue ultimately is about life and death. It's about the fight for life, to be in life, to postpone death. That's what the fight's about. And to deny your feelings, to pretend they're not there, to hide them, to bury them inside, is to avoid your own life, your own truth. About 8 years ago, maybe 10 now, I took a course in mindfulness meditation. It's a 2-month course. There was a woman in the course who was terminally ill, metastatic cancer. And at the end of the course, she and I became friendly, and I said to her, "Why did you take a course like this? I mean, the teacher talks in terms of decades before you get any sense of how it works, what it means." She said, "All my life, wherever I was always somewhere else. Wherever I was, part of me was in the future, planning, worrying, in the past, regretting." She said, "In the weeks, months, maybe days I have left, I want to be where I am. I want to live my life. I want to feel my life. Now I know how precious it is." If your life in this moment is pain, be pain. It might not be in the next moment. You might feel gratitude, being able to hold someone's hand or look in their eye. Anticipation of death, sometimes fearing it'll happen, sometimes hoping it will. It's part of the process. It's part of the process of struggling with emotions, of living in the moment, of facing the future and fearing the future. My sister and my mother both died of brain diseases. And as I saw the light slowly going out in both of their eyes, I wanted to reach inside and grab them and say, one more conversation, one more exchange of I love yous, one more word, one more chance to say goodbye. My sister, who had a brain tumor about 3 months, 4 months before she died, I was at her house, and she offered to make me a cup of tea. And she couldn't figure out, she and I were alone, she couldn't figure out where the tea bags were, where the cups were, and what went in where first. And of course I couldn't do it. So she and I worked on it together. It took about 20 minutes. I cried, I felt terrible agony, I felt gratitude, I felt love, I felt all the emotions so powerfully. I felt intimacy. 20 minutes to get that cup of tea. And I am so grateful that I felt all the emotions because I can still taste it. I can still taste that cup of tea. Because fortunately, I was in my life in the moment, feeling all the pain and all the joy, not railing against what I didn't have or fearing what was coming. Still taste the tea. One of the byproducts of being a caregiver with something like this, and maybe the most painful, I think, is the alienation. When I had my accident, the alienation was more painful than the paralysis. Everybody looked at me differently. My best friends backed off. I was on a path that nobody knew about. And I was profoundly alone. And in your case, you're doing it by yourself. The searing pain of alienation is one of the worst experiences a human can feel. Look what's going on in the suburbs of Paris. It's about alienation. Much of the hatred, much of the violence, it's about alienation. And our own suffering is about alienation. Nobody makes eye contact with you, real eye contact with you anymore. It's agony. I was years ago, Hahnemann's lobby, waiting to meet a colleague, and I was sitting there just like this, wearing a suit, had my case on my lap, had a cup of coffee on my case, and a woman walked by and put $1 in my mug. What the hell's so funny about that? Well, I learned a couple. Oh, then she came back when she realized it and tried to get her $1 back. I said, not going to happen. I learned two things. One is I don't have to worry about managed care. As long as I got my mug, I can earn a living. Sorry, Murray, it's just, the wheelchair thing ain't all bad. And the other lesson I learned is she didn't see me. She didn't see a human. She saw a wheelchair. They don't see you. They see a caregiver. They don't see your loved one. They're afraid to look at the humanity in them, in you, in us. It's frightening. Because we're all the same. We're all the same. It's frightening. What cures alienation? Eye contact. You look in someone's eyes long enough, you can see their soul, and you'll never be the same again. Two of the most critical factors causing caretaker burnout are helplessness and denial of feelings. Helplessness because you think you should do what you can't do. Denial of feelings because you think your feelings are less important now. Someone else is more important than you because they're quite ill, because their future might look bleak, because you probably will be here longer than they will. So your feelings aren't as important as theirs. Well, the people who organized this conference disagree with that because they made this speech the keynote speech, not the speech about diagnosis or treatment, the speech that talks about how badly you need care and how important you are, not just as a caregiver, but as humans. As humans. You suffer. Why? Don't tell me about them and FTD. With all due respect, that's not why you suffer. FTD is a fact. It's a neurological illness. That's not why you suffer. You suffer because you love. That's why you suffer. If you didn't love, you wouldn't suffer. And the more you love, the more you suffer. Problem is, when you try to do something you cannot do, or be something you cannot be, the guilt, the shame, the anxiety, the fear makes the love go underground. And then all you can feel is the anxiety and the fear and the terror and the guilt and the shame. And then you can't feel the love anymore. I see people in my office every day who are dealing with their adolescents, who aren't behaving in a way their parents need them to behave. And they're enraged and they're fighting, and It's about love. And nobody can feel the love anymore. And that's what it's all about. That's why you're doing this. That's why they're here. That's why you're connected. That's why you wake up in the morning. It's because of love. And you lose it often behind the anxiety. Don't lose it. Sheldon Kopp, a psychoanalyst who wrote what I consider a Bible for psychotherapists, he said, love is learning to live with your helplessness in the face of a loved one's suffering. I heard some groans. Tolerating your helplessness in the face of a loved one's suffering is an act of love. Boy, that's hard to do, isn't it? So, when you jump up to push, to change, to pick up the phone, is it about them or is it about your helplessness? And if you feel helpless, you owe it to yourself to feel helpless. Because that's your life in that moment. And that's an act of love for you. To tolerate your own helplessness. To feel it. This culture tells us if you have a bad feeling, it should go away. You should take a pill or do exercise or work or I don't know what. Be all that you can be. There are no bad feelings. Your feelings are your life. If you feel helpless, I beg you, feel helpless. Because the more you can feel, and the more you can tolerate your feelings, and the less you're afraid of your feelings, the more courageous you're going to be going forward. Victor Hugo said in Les Mis, he said, in darkness, the pupil dilates as though searching for light. And in adversity, the heart dilates as though searching for God. Now, I don't want to go off on a theological tangent here, but the concept of the dilated heart is where we find all the gifts life has to offer. We all know the experience of a dilated heart. When you see a loved one, baby's born, when you watch someone being kind to another, you can feel it physically in your chest. Your heart dilates, you're open. It's where you feel love and kindness. It's where you feel generosity. It's where you feel most human and most connected to the larger world, in the dilated heart. Now, I made this comment at one of the teaching hospitals in the Philadelphia area during grand rounds. And one of the surgeons in the back raised his hand and said, yeah, but, which is what surgeons are trained to do. And he said, but the physical heart can't stay dilated, you die. It must open and close. And after I muttered something about smart ass, I thought, and the metaphorical heart too. It must open and close, or else you would die. So the heart of love, of compassion, of generosity, of presence, can't stay open. It's got to close. It's got to close. What I ask of you, what I wish for you, is simply when it's closed, just know it's closed. and be kind to yourself despite that, because of that. When your heart's closed, you need compassion. You don't need judgment, and you don't need to be ignored. When your heart's closed, just know it's closed. So that's some of the things caretakers need. There's some other things, too, that are important. I was in California a couple of years ago visiting the redwoods. Anybody ever seen the redwoods out there? They're amazing. They're like buildings. And I was there with a friend of mine who lives in California, and she said, you know, Dan, for such big trees, they've got very shallow root systems. So I said, so how do they stand? She said, they grow close together and their roots interlock. That's how they get their strength. Their roots interlock. That's what we're doing right now. We're interlocking our roots. That's a large part of what this conference is about. It's interlocking roots. Support networks are critical. And remember, people can tolerate your vulnerability. Turn your flashers on. People will open their hearts to you, like that gas station attendant did for me. Turn your flashers on. Don't pretend to be strong. It's a disservice. It's a disservice to yourself, and it's a disservice to your larger community. Sadness opens people up. Strength doesn't. These things help. A couple other things, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I've got a friend of mine who's terminally ill from Parkinson's. He's about my age. We met about 3 or 4 years ago. We vacationed at the same spot together and became friendly, he and his wife and I. I never was able to speak with him because he was in a wheelchair and silent by the time we met. So we spoke mostly through his wife. But now that he's end stage, he's in his apartment, and he and I can talk because he's got his letterboard that he points to. So one day, recently, I was visiting him and asking questions like I would ask about life and death, and does he feel like he's living, or does he feel like he's dying, and what goes through his mind when he sits quietly, and those kinds of questions. Eye contact. I wanted to hear his heart. And we were quiet for a couple minutes, and then he starts to point out on his board. He says, HOWISYOUR I said, how is my love life? He said, you want to know how my love life is? And he nods, and I said, it's about as good as your health. He started to laugh. I thought he was going to blow his trick. I was scared. I said, Marvin, if you die now, I'm going to kill you. There's always room for humor. There's always room for humor. FTD is not funny, but there's always room for humor. So we've talked about humor, and we've talked about psychology. We've talked about community, but we haven't talked about faith. Faith, we know, contributes to resilience, and it contributes to healing. And I'm not talking about political faith, the kind we hear about every day. I'm talking about the kind of faith that contributes to opening our hearts and keeping them open. Most people think faith is about a higher power, a divine being. I was talking about faith with a woman who was recently injured, a relatively new quadriplegic. And she said, "Are you telling me I have to believe in God?" And I said, "Not at all. But you have to believe in something outside of your own will, because your own will ain't going to get you very far. You have to believe in something bigger than you." My dad died about 5 years ago. He was a passionate, eloquent atheist. Passionate about them. And I wrote in his obituary, he had an apartment overlooking the ocean in Atlantic City. He spent the last 70 years of his life in Atlantic City. And he and I were watching the beach. It was a windy day in January, and the sand seemed to be blowing out to the ocean, clearing the footprints on the beach and blowing the sand out to the ocean. He said, "You know, Danny, I'm going to be there soon." Faith is about knowing we're a small part of something very big. There's an anecdote that Maury told in Tuesdays with Maury. He told a vignette about two waves in the ocean. And the wave in front, closest to the beach, said to the wave behind him, he said, "You know, I'm scared. Look what's happening. Aren't you?" And the wave in the back said, "No, I'm not scared." And the wave in the front said, "But we're about to crash to the shore. We won't be anymore. We won't exist anymore. Why aren't you afraid? Same thing's going to happen to you." And the wave in the back said, "Well, you're afraid because you think you're a wave." He said, "I'm not afraid because I know I'm part of the ocean." Faith is more than knowing that. Faith is knowing that. So, we have lots of time left, and I wanted to leave lots of time to hear your thoughts, your reactions, and your stories. We've got a couple of mics. Thanks for listening, by the way.